Okay, hello to guys who have already joined. I'm just going to give it another 20 to 30 seconds to allow a few more people to join this webinar. Okay, I think we have a good few here, so I will start. Welcome to all who've logged into this webinar entitled Passing an MHRA Inspection in the UK, Pro Tips from an Expert Panel, hosted by Qualio. Before we start, if anyone has any questions during the webinar, feel free to enter them in the Q&A panel at the bottom of the screen. So just a little introduction to Qualio. Our CEO had a vision for life science companies, and that was to assist them to bring their products to market faster with an easy-to-use solution that focused on a quality-centric approach. With the right solution, putting quality at the forefront of an organization should make things easier and more efficient. And that's why more than 400 life science companies and healthcare businesses trust Qualio to optimize and automate their quality management system. The story doesn't stop there. Qualio's platform is scalable and its software is flexible so that as your business grows, it not only meets your business requirements, but also your quality requirements as well. So let's get started with introductions. I'm Molly Calvi. I'm a senior quality specialist at Qualio, and I'm joined by my colleague, Lola Furlong. We're so lucky to be joined by Karen Hugh, the head of quality and GXP compliance at 30 Technology, to discuss all things MHRA inspections, focusing on the QMS requirements and giving some tips and hints on how best to prepare, how to use your eQMS during the inspection, and if you receive any findings, how to use the eQMS to manage those. And just as a note for clarity, during this webinar, I'll be using the term audit and inspection, or auditor and inspector interchangeably. So let's get back to our panel now. I just want to introduce Karen. Karen brings a huge wealth of knowledge to this webinar, and particularly inspection expertise. Karen, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your background?
Thank you, Molly. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to those who have joined the webinar. I want to thank Qualio for inviting me to be on the panel. I've been a QA professional for over 30 years, and I've worked in pharma, in CNOs, and also as a consultant. I'm now working inside a small biotech that's looking at both pharmaceutical and medical device products. I actually enjoy inspections. Also, when I was in a CRO, I enjoyed external audits. I know I sound a bit weird, but they're actually quite great fun. I have been involved in many inspections by regulatory authorities, including the MHRA, by the BSI as a notified body inspection for our ISO certification, for FDA, EMA, and other inspectorates worldwide. In preparing for inspections, I've always wanted to look at how our systems and processes can work for us rather than against us. In my last notified body inspection, this extended to allowing access to our eQMS system to the assessors, as they're known by BSI, the inspectors, and allowed me to identify how to ensure the company has the right skills to be able to manage that, the right training, the right material to assist inspectors with such access, including what they require pre-documentations and during their inspection requests. So during the webinar, I hope we can provide you with some tips and hints in using your eQMS to help you. And before I hand over to Molly, whether this is your first or feels like your 101st inspection, we hope you'll enjoy what we tell you in the next hour, and also we'll ask sessions and maybe even pass on your own tips and hints too. Thanks, Molly.
Thanks, Karen. It's great to have you here. We're also joined by Lola Furlong. Lola, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you so much, Molly. So hello to everyone. I am Lola, a senior quality specialist at Qualio. So prior to joining Qualio, I worked in both quality and compliance roles in large multinationals and startups across Europe and North America. I'm also an ASQ certified medical device auditor, and I've experience on both sides of the table. So that's answering questions as an SME and asking SMEs questions. I've really enjoyed transitioning from industry to providing quality advice in Qualio as I get to meet customers from a wide array of backgrounds. I learn about the interesting products they're developing, and ultimately I get to help them get their products to the market quickly.
Thank you, Lola. As I said before, I'm Molly Kelvey. I'm also a senior quality specialist here at Qualio. My background is in quality, and prior to joining Qualio, I held quality and laboratory roles within multinationals that manufactured both pharmaceuticals and medical devices. I have to say, Karen, I'm in total agreement with you. I've always loved a good audit. I love the buzz of the back room, of presenting as an SME, et cetera, et cetera. I know not everyone will share that sentiment, but hopefully we can give you some tips today that will help you prepare for an MHRA inspection and help the process run more smoothly. So to start out, we're going to get a little bit of audience participation. We have a poll for you guys. So this poll will pop up. The question we wanted to ask you today is, how many MHRA inspections have you been a part of? Has it been 0, 1 to 5, or too many to even mention? If you guys could answer, I'll give you guys 10 seconds to complete that. Okay. Do we have the poll results? Okay, so looking at the poll results here, it looks like we have a wide range of experience levels in our audience today. So a lot of people with 0 MHRA inspections under their belts, a lot of people with 1 to 5, and 11% that are saying too many. So hopefully this webinar will be helpful to all levels here, right? I have one more question for you guys, just to get an idea of experience within the MHRA audits, right? We just want to know what role you guys have played. So have you been the main quality host? Have you been an authorized escort? Have you been a runner or a scribe? Have you been the auditee or supported as an SME? Have you been drafted into other departments, or do you have no experience? And just a note, you can select multiple answers here. I'll give you guys a few more seconds to answer that. And we'll come back to that, those poll results in a little bit, okay? So let's get started and dive in. First, we're going to talk about preparing for an MHRA inspection, right? So Lola, let's start with you. What would you say are the most important things you can do to prepare for any inspection?
Yeah, so preparing for any type of inspection, be it announced or unannounced, it can be divided into 4 main categories. There's internal training to prepare the company and the staff, responding to any pre-inspection requests by your inspector, having a backup plan in place, and also preparing your EQMS in advance of the inspection. So if we look at staff, it's very important to have an SOP, a standard operating procedure, on announced and unannounced inspections. As part of their training. Ensure that they know the terminology associated with the various functions during an inspection. So I think this would be a great time actually to take a look at those poll results. Okay, so as you can see, we have people who've been involved in every aspect, doing multiple roles. This is very common. So people often have to do multiple roles in an audit. It's therefore very important to train your employees on what each role does, and also to ensure that they can use the EQMS during the inspections if they have to take up one of these roles, for example, on short notice. So let's talk about some of these roles in more detail. When we talk about an authorized escort, that's the person who is given the task of escorting the inspectors at all times during the inspection. The scribe will take notes during the inspection sessions. The runner will bring colleagues to the inspection room, collect documentation, and assist in housekeeping tasks. It's important to ensure that staff are aware of their roles when the inspection occurs, and that goes from top management who need to provide the resources and support for the inspection activities, the SMEs who need to know that they will be asked questions by the inspectors, the members of the back room, so they're the people who are going to keep the inspection on track and make it operationally successful, and those who'll be involved in the front room, that's your audit-facing room. Train all employees to only answer the questions asked. There's nothing wrong with silence, and there's no need for small talk here. Let your objective evidence, that's your documents and records, do the talking for you. In terms of an inspector will request documents in advance of the inspection, so keep an eye on the format that these documents are requested in. Do they want them in a file, or are they happy to access your EQMS? And if they're happy, you can prepare a document ahead of time that includes links to the requested documents. So let's see now how Qualio can help you in your MHRA inspection for pre-inspection document requests. So this slide shows a document that's stored in Qualio, and it was prepared in advance of the inspection based on requests from the auditor. All of the objective evidence that they want to review is smart linked within the document, meaning that whenever the inspector clicks on the link, it will take them to the most current and up-to-date version of that document. This makes it very easy for the inspector to navigate between and review the various documents that they requested prior to actually conducting the inspection. So moving on, one of the questions that I often get asked is what happens if my internet goes down and I have no access to Qualio during the inspection? One tip is to make sure you always download critical documents ahead of time so that the inspector can start reviewing any they might request while your internet issues are getting resolved. When preparing your Qualio instance or your EQMS instance in advance, you can decide what your inspector can and can't see. By creating groups specifically for the inspector and tagging documents with an inspector tag, you can prevent the inspector from actually having immediate access to the entire content of your EQMS. And later on in this webinar, I'm going to show you what an inspector can see versus what an employee can see within the company during an inspection. It's always beneficial to provide the inspector with a quick training sheet or a video ahead of time just on how to use your EQMS. Doesn't need to be an in-depth training that you would give to one of your employees, but a high-level overview on how to navigate the system is really beneficial.
Okay, thank you, Lola, for all those helpful tips. Karen, I know you've been involved in multiple audits using Qualio. Can you walk us through how the team at 30 Technology is prepared for an inspection?
I haven't actually been involved in an MHRA inspection using Qualio, but the principle's the same. And last year we had to set up a notified body inspections. We actually had 3 of them. So those have been our most recent inspections. We use Qualio as our EQMS. What it allowed us to do was it allowed us to make documentation available to the inspector, a bit like Lola has explained already, that we could identify by setting an account up, we could identify what documents we wanted them to see, and we could tag them appropriately. One of the things we do have to remember is that, like working with some of our colleagues, we are not all experts in IT and we're not all computer literate. Some inspectors know systems well and some inspectors not so well. So it's a good idea to actually talk to your inspector in advance where that's actually practical. And for those of you who were at the MHRA symposium last week, you would have heard about how the inspectors want to be able to go into the trial master files, but they don't need to have a 2-hour company training presentation on how to use the system. They're quite experts usually in understanding how to navigate some of these computer systems. So unless it's an unannounced inspection, and we'll talk more about that shortly, talk to your inspectors in advance, ascertain if they're happy to use the EQMS and how they'd like to be trained in the system. Use the training to make sure they're able to navigate using a document very similar to what Lola used. We have an index where we smart link the key documents they've requested, and a smart link takes you to the latest effective version of our documentation. So if they ask to see our policy on safety, we can actually link that policy immediately so they can go into that policy. We have to remember that the MHRA also likes to have access, as I said, in advance, during, and sometimes after the inspection. So make sure that if you've got a system like Qualio, it's easy, it's manually controlled, you control who accesses when and what they access. In some other EQMSs, I know that you might set up with a start date and a stop date, so you don't want to suddenly lock your inspector out. provide them a crib sheet. So we actually use some screenshots and various documents to help us explain to the inspector what they're going to see. We explain the tags and we show them in a few keystrokes how easy it is to get to our documents. The second thing we do have in place in 30 is, because we have a medical device and the BSI can do unannounced inspections, our SOP covers both announced and unannounced inspections. So obviously an announced one is where you're told that they're going to turn up. Well, what about an unannounced inspection? You don't know, so what you've had no chance to have a dialogue with your lead inspector, so you haven't really had a chance to prepare the documentation in the same way. But if you've already got an auditor tag set up in your EQMS and you already know that you can add their email address upon their arrival, you can automatically make your documents available very quickly and very smartly. So we also have a very simple procedure for training people on announced and unannounced inspections, what they have to do, what the rules are for our company. And we have a rule that within 30 minutes, our company should be ready from the inspector ringing our doorbell for them actually being sitting in our boardroom reviewing the first sets of documents. Now, there's no regulatory guidance for what I've said. Nothing, you won't read anything that says they should be ready within 45 minutes. But like anything in our regulatory world, there's always an expectation that comes out, both from what the industry observes during its own inspections and from the inspectors themselves. We also need to make sure that senior management can be involved, and obviously they need to be identified, and especially for notified body inspections, they have to be available to the inspector. So again, our process covers not only about using the EQMS, but the whole process of being ready for that inspection to happen. So there we are, ready to go in 30 minutes.
Very good. Thank you for that, Karen. So now we're going to look at using the EQMS during the inspection, right? So Karen, when you say you prepare an inspection account ahead of time, can you explain like how you do that? And then maybe we can demo what that looks like when it's done.
Yes, of course. So I've already said we use Qualio as our EQMS, and I personally have 3 accounts. I have one in my role as a quality assurance person. I have one as my role as like the employees have, and I have one set to how an inspector would operate. So it mimics how an inspector would see it. So it's actually called our inspector account. And what I can do is, having that set up already, all I have to do is like clone that account for an inspector. Qualio works on using the email address. So once I have that email address, I can place them into the system. I can add all of the tags that we would normally have, and that automatically makes visible sets of documents that we know will either have been requested or may be requested in those instances of an unannounced inspection. It allows it to do it very quickly from preparation to closure, and I can remove or add documents really quickly based on the inspection requests that come out of the inspection room. So in a moment, Lola's going to demonstrate how the system does this. But what you have to remember is each company uses their systems in different ways. Qualio themselves in their audit team uses Qualio slightly different to how I use Qualio and set my tags up. So it's what works for you. We both do use tags though, and it's a good idea to set up those tags so that you can add the auditor or inspector tag so that they can see and read the document. I've already said about crib sheets. So one of the other things is making sure that your inspector is already in the system. They can see what they want to see. They've got a crib sheet in case they get lost, and also give them some ideas of any common pitfalls. So for example, we have smart links, and smart links go to the latest version of the document. But as Lola will demonstrate in a moment, if the document has not been linked with access for the inspector, that smart link will not return a valid document. It will return a broken link. But the broken link, it's not broken, it's just that the inspector hasn't been given access to that document. The important thing I can stress to you all, though, is make sure that the tag's working. And that's why I have my own inspector account and make sure that the right document has been selected and I haven't given them access to the wrong document by accident. So I think I'll hand back to Lola, and I think she's going to do a demonstration of the system for you to show how easy it is to use.
Yeah, thank you so much, Karen. So the first slide, this is the one that we're looking at, is showing that we're in the same webinar demo account for two different users. On the left, I have an employee who acts as a quality user, and on the right, I have your inspector. So the first difference is that the quality user has a populated dashboard of outstanding items to review, approve, and train to, etc. The inspector doesn't see any of this. Next, the quality user has access to the events tab. They can create and review events such as non-conformances, CAPAs, complaints, but the inspector does not have any events access, and they must request it from the quality point of contact within the company. The next slide shows you that a quality user has access to the workspace where documents are created, reviewed, archived, and the library, which is where all the effective documents are stored. The inspector only has access to the library. So when we click on the library of both users, you can see that the quality user has access to all 31 documents, while the inspector has access to only 15. And this is due to how the documents have been tagged. Inspectors will only have access to documents tagged auditor, as they've been included in an auditor group upon admission to the Qualio platform. So next, I'll show a short video of what happens when both users click into a document that they both have access to. So they can both see the content, but when the inspector wants to navigate further and view a reference within the document, they're not granted access. The quality user will be able to see the information in the document that they click, but on the right, it looks like a broken link. It's not a broken link, it's just that they need to be granted access in order to have the permission to view that document. So let's say you're in the inspection with an inspector and they request something additional that wasn't on the original list of documents that they had requested. Molly, could you tell us how you'd handle that situation?
Yeah, sure. Hold on, let me just bring my slides back up here. Okay. All right, so like if an inspector asks you if they can see a document or procedure that's stored in your eQMS, and you haven't given them access to it yet, basically you would review the document yourself to ensure that you're happy to provide it to the inspector and then grant the access. So I have a demo here where I can show you how to add the auditor tag to a certain document during the inspection and how it then becomes visible to the auditor. So if you can see now, if you need to add an auditor to a document, basically you go up to the document section, you click on workspace, and then go to the effective documents. And in this case, we're going to add the auditor to SOP 9, the procedure for purchasing. So you click on that, go to manage tags, click on auditor, and then apply changes. So the moment you see the auditor only has, oh, sorry, actually, you'll get a notification to say the visibility has been affected. And now you can see that that document has both the employee and auditor tag on it. So we can go back to our slides then. Let me see here. Okay, so as you can see, that was pretty easy to do. It's much easier than having to print the document or scan it and then save it to a file. And you know, when you do that, the auditor, because they only have basic access to the Qualio system, they'll only see the effective document. So Karen, how have you handled it, for example, like if an inspector asked to see something like an event or your training or let's say your internal audit program?
Okay, yeah, so as you've explained, the inspectors don't have access to the events, they don't have access to training, and also at 30, I actually store my audit documentation within my eQMS. So I don't want them to have immediate access to those documents unless they can request something. And depending on the type of inspection, whether they're actually allowed to have access to things like my audit reports. So upon request, things like events, we can actually demo the system to the inspector. So I can show the system live on the screen. It shows the current status of our events. It shows the current status of our training, what level of compliance we're at, what's open events, closed events, what the root cause analysis was, and all of the information is there. And let's say they choose a particular event where they want to actually look at the end-to-end process, from the receipt of the event to the root cause analysis to then the CAPA that's been done, and then the validation or the confirmation phase at the end to make sure that we're happy and that we know that the CAPA has worked. So what we can do is we can actually download controlled copies of those documents out of Qualio, and we can actually either attach them back into the document, the index document that Lola showed you earlier, and we'll demonstrate that to you in a second, or we could obviously provide them a paper copy of that document. The other part of things like training, we could actually, we will actually as well demonstrate the training aspects to you. But again, with training, I can actually provide both the training for an individual, and I can show the whole company's training, literally on a set of keystrokes. And if they want to see training per person or per an actual procedure, or per a whole department, that data is immediately available and downloadable. So I think on the screen, I think Molly's going to go through some of the screenshots that we have to show you.
Yep, so hold on one second. So here we see the training attached to the document that we provided to the auditor at the beginning. You can add the training that way, or you can demo the training. And I have a video too that we can show right now of what you can show the auditor in terms of training. Right, so if you want to demo training for an auditor, basically you would go into the system with them, you'd go up to training, click on overall training, and this brings you to a training dashboard. So you can see the total percentage of training that's been completed within the organization, a breakdown of what that training looks like, and then median completion time. So the time that it's from it's being assigned to the time it's been completed. You can also then show training by document. You can show it by group, or you can show it by individual employee, right? And all of this is exportable by clicking here, and then you can export it in a CSV, a spreadsheet, Excel spreadsheet, or as a PDF. I will get out of there and go back to our slides now. Okay. Let's see. Oops, hold on. Okay. All right. Okay, let me find my place now, sorry. Okay, now if a document is requested by an auditor, there's some reason that you don't have the evidence at the time that the auditor asks for it, like that's okay. So at the end of each day, there'll be a closing meeting with the inspector. During that meeting, you'll have a chance to discuss outstanding items and plan to present evidence in the next day's schedule. So the big thing here is to ask the inspector ahead of time how they'd like that evidence presented to them. And I know, Karen, did you have anything else to add on that about providing documentation to the auditor?
I think the only thing that I would add to this is that we're advocating here the use of the EQMS to provide lots of information easily to inspectors, but also being mindful, as I've said earlier, that they may also have asked for access to ETMFs if it's a clinical trial inspection, or if there's other inspections, there may be different systems that they may need to have access to. We always try to make sure that the inspectors have access to everything. So we don't just leave them in a room with their own laptop and say, here you go, you know, look at all of our documents. We do try to make sure they're not struggling, or if they found it difficult to navigate, we can also provide printouts and downloads of copies. The other thing that I mentioned is that I run my audit program through Qualio. So again, things like audit certificates, I can immediately tag those. They can either be seen in the EQMS, in the ETMF, but sometimes when it's at a QA session for an inspection, sometimes they actually like to see what the QA department holds. So therefore, it's an easy way of me being able to show the authorised documents. I think that probably is one of the best things about Qualio is there's quite a lot of information that's held inside it. And depending on the type of company that you work in, I'm actually quite an open auditor. So therefore, at the moment, I allow full access to our whole SOP and procedural documents. Now, in a small company, we don't have hundreds. In a large company, that might not be practical. So always think about the tips and things that we're telling you is how will you apply that within your company? How do you make it work for yourself? So I think that's probably it for now, well, that section.
Thanks very much for that, Karen. We'll move on then to what happens after the inspection. And I wanted to ask you, Karen, if the inspector has some findings, is it time to panic?
Yeah, okay, so no time to panic, and you shouldn't ever panic. You know, inspections are there for all of us to continually improve, and you know, most inspectorates work on that. They want to help us get our drug to market. They're not trying to stop us getting our drug or our device to market. So most inspectorates hold a closing meeting or some form of exit meeting with the company at the end of the inspection. Now, in most cases, a lot of the inspectorates are working on the premise that by the time you come to the closing meeting, they've already discussed a lot of the issues with you. So, you know, apart from maybe one or two people, most people know what's going to come up as the findings. Now, all audits and inspections do allow us to go along this pathway of continuous improvement. So when inspection findings are made, we actually automatically log them again into our EQMS. We log them into an audit finding sheet. We log them there and we do start working on them, even though we're still waiting for the report. Now, if there's something that's wrong and we actually agree that it's wrong, we don't need to wait for the report to turn up. We can already start actioning on it. However, what we're very careful not to do is to overgive the inspectorate information on how we're doing our continuous improvement. So we try to make sure that we answer the finding and provide the CAPA based around the finding they've made. And then anything else that we feel that we need to do as part of our improvement processes, we log them on the same sheet, but we make sure that we don't sort of like overgive or overburden ourselves on what the inspectors are inspecting to come back and look at later on. So the thing is that you can start working. Make sure you know how the inspectorate wants those findings and those responses to come back. So if you're going to use the EQMS like I do, is make sure that you know what the template is that is being used. Some inspectorates actually say you must use our template. Others are, well, this is how we'd like you to reply to us, but we can use our own templates. So again, we look to see what the guidance is. So the MHRA publishes, especially for GCP, lots of guidance on how to respond to inspection findings. We have that also from the BSI. Ensure you have timelines. And again, one of the good things for me using the EQMS is that I can actually set timelines for response by the internal teams. I can set up our due dates, and I can make sure that I've given the ownership to the right teams. I can make sure that the right team of reviewers are there, and it can go through an approval process internally. I also set up obviously a fake approval time. So if the inspectorate's expecting it back on day 10, I have it ready and approved by day 8. Sometimes I don't even tell the teams what time the inspectorate believe it to be back by, so that I do get it done on time and allow myself that little bit of leeway. I think the important thing is that for any inspection is having a good process for this follow-up. So whatever works in your company, not only do you need to make sure that you've completed the CAPA and sent it off to the inspectorate for their approval and agreement, but you've got to do that work as well. So the EQMS allows us to trace through all the actions and make sure they're done. But also when the inspector comes knocking for the next inspection, announced or unannounced, we can actually pull that information quickly and easily at our next inspection upon request to show how we've actually completed the actions and shown that we've improved from where the inspector found us last time. So I think you can see that using our EQMS and using the Qualio system for us has actually been a great asset. I think back to Molly now for anything else that we want to talk about.
Okay, well, that's great. Thank you so much, Karen, for that. So that is the end of our webinar, but we're going to open up the Q&A and answer some of you guys' questions, because I can see there's quite a few coming through. I'd like to thank Karen and Lola for their participation in that, or in this webinar. And let's move on to the questions and see if we can help you guys with anything and answer any of your questions. Let's see now.
So I'm quite happy to answer Deborah's question. You said, do you foresee the MHRA continuing to conduct remote inspections or hybrid inspections in a post-COVID world? Now, I'm not 100% sure of everything that was said last week at the MHRA conference, that there was a virtual conference. But as far as I can see, I don't think that with all the skills that both auditors and inspectors have used as to why we would actually go away from doing some form of remote inspections and hybrid inspections. But also, one of the things that was happening just almost pre-COVID was that the MHRA was actually conducting sometimes a virtual day before they were coming on site as well. So actually being able to have a smart e-system that you can use in order to work with your inspectors, I think is actually going to help. And I think that in answer to your question, I can see remote inspections, I can see hybrid, and I can also see on-site ones. And I think what will happen these days is that with dialogue with the companies, the best inspection process will be done between the teams, i.e. the company and the inspectorate, in order to effect the best inspection for the activities they need to do.
Thanks, Karen. Let's see, another question here. What's the time in which one should provide documents asked by the auditor? Is there a time frame which is declared as reasonable? The question applies for both on-site and online audits. So I suppose in terms of the documents requested ahead of time, they'll usually give you a date by which they want those. You can then give them access to your EQMS by that date. And then in terms of ones that are, I think we kind of answered this during the webinar, but in terms of ones that are asked during the audit, usually the next day, usually 24 hours, I would say, is a reasonable time frame. But you would agree that in the closing meeting for that day, of what you were going to present and when you were going to present it for the next day.
I think also as well, to add to that, is that one of the things that you look at is the criticality of that document and how quickly should you be able to find it, and how quickly should they be able to have it at your fingertips. It's also important to discuss with the inspector, if you know that it's going to take you 2 days to get that document because it has to come from a certain location or even be called out of an archive or something, then explain that to the inspector. You know, it's always about open dialogue between two. So I think reasonable amounts of times is looking at the document itself. As Molly says, you know, if you say to them, well, we'll have those ready by tomorrow. But I've also been at an inspection where an inspector's turned around and said, I want to see that document in the next hour. And so you have to make sure that you know, unless you've got a good reason to go back to them and go, I'm really sorry, that's not going to happen, you really do need to know that you can pull your documents quickly and efficiently, and also, as I said, have that dialogue with the inspector.
Just noticed as well that we have 2 questions in the chat that I wouldn't want to get missed, and I'm happy to answer those. There was a question on what are the risks of sharing everything in advance? Won't this limit your ability to manage the inspector's expectations? So the trick here is don't share everything in advance, share only what the inspector requests. So you can expect those requests to come. There will be requests, and the inspector does that to reduce the amount of time they're going to spend auditing when they're in the actual audit, be that remote or on site. What is your recommendation to test your readiness to unannounced audits or inspections? So have, Karen might be able to share a bit more on this, but have that SOP ready, and make sure it's part of, you know, an onboarding process that employees are all aware of what to do. You know, make sure that people know who they will be in the inspection, what role they're going to play. And there's nothing to stop you from having, you know, your internal auditing team perform an unannounced inspection, just to see how you respond to that.
Yeah, I think the other thing is make it fun. You know, Molly and I said that we love audits and inspections, and one of the reasons is that you can actually make them fun. So in order to manage the unannounced inspections that we may have, we've never had one yet, but we may have. I had to be a bit innovative. I'm sitting actually in our office today, although I've got a 30 logo background, virtual background. Our offices are all glass. So the moment an inspector opens the door, they can see absolutely everything of our company. I can't have them running around, you know, watching us running around, cleaning boards and making the boardroom presentable and all of that kind of thing. So our actual unannounced inspection process has a process where upon answering the buzzer on the door and somebody says that they are an inspector from X, automatically a person takes another person, they basically go down, get the inspector and take them to the kitchen. The kitchen in our building is the one place I can evacuate immediately without anybody batting an eyelid. Everybody knows that that's our process. We take the inspectors in there. We have a clean tea room or clean kitchen policy. So I know that I can take them in there. I can sit them down. We can make them a drink. And it's in a room that is not visible to the rest of the company. So therefore, somebody is there with them, looking after them, while the rest of the SOP gets put into process, which is inform senior management, clear the boardroom, clean the boards, get some notepads and pens out of the cupboard, and sit and make sure that everybody's ready to go in for the inspection within 30 minutes. We test it as fun. We've had a fun time doing it. Will it work on the first time it happens? Who knows? But what I'd like to think is that everybody in our company does know that they don't let an inspector on site without checking credentials. And if it's an unannounced, i.e. none of us knew it was going to happen, they know to take them straight to the tea room and offer them a cup of tea. And that's our process.
Very good, very good. I see another interesting question here. In your experience, are there differences in inspections conducted by the different regulatory agencies, for example, the FDA, the EMA, the MHRA? And if so, can you give some examples? I mean, for the most part, like, inspections run quite similarly, regardless of who it is. There are different types of audits. So the MHRA does, you know, GCP audits. They do good pharmacovigilance practice audits, GMP, GLP, GDP. So I suppose it depends on what type of audit that they are doing. But in my experience, in terms of working in industry, regardless of who is doing the audit, they all run pretty much the same. They want to see your quality management system. And then depending on what type of audit it is, there'd be other requests that they'd want to see. I don't know if Karen or Lola, if you had anything to add to that.
Yeah, so my last FDA inspection on site was actually out in a European country, and everyone always says, oh, the FDA inspectors, you know, you mustn't do this, you mustn't do that, and you must do this and you must do that, and you had this sort of like perception that they're so different to an MHRA inspector. Well, my last MHRA inspection and my last FDA inspection, I'd like to say, were pretty similar. We had a really nice inspector. We asked them what they needed from us. We asked them how they needed it from us. We asked them who they wanted to talk to. We arranged that for them. We looked after them. We made sure that they had everything they needed. And as a consequence, they were very open and engaging with us. We asked politely if we could do certain things. For example, could the sponsor sit in on an FDA site inspection? And they said yes. Now, normally, we've always been told you mustn't go in. Well, if you don't ask, you don't get. So I asked, and she said, I asked the PI to ask, and the PI came back and said, the FDA inspector said, you're more than welcome to come and sit in the room. I just have to take your names down. Well, that's absolutely fine. So I think the important thing is the differences are usually the fact that they're set up slightly differently. So an FDA inspection in the US just happens. You know, people just turn up, or you might get a day's notification. For an FDA inspector for a site audit in Europe, you tend to get a lot more notice because they have to make sure that they're not traveling thousands of miles only to find that the PI's on holiday, or they don't know which hospital they've got to go to. For example, I had to organise a translator, and that's not something that you can usually do in 5 minutes. You have a lot more dialogue. So there are differences even within an individual agency. With the MHRA and EMA, I always just find, again, it's talking to them, finding out how they want to do things, explaining to them where your operations exist, finding out where they want to be, who they would need to talk to, so that you send them to the address, to the right place, so that they don't turn up at an inspection and find that all the people they wish to talk to are in a different country. Or are they happy to have access to your electronic systems? You know, the way of asking of getting what you want is to try and make sure that you tell them that's what you would like to do, and then see if there's any problems with doing that. And 9 times out of 10, you find that the inspectors, if you talk to them nicely, they talk to you nicely. Or maybe I've just been very lucky and just had nice inspectors, but I've had quite a lot of them. So I hope that it's how we do it, not the fact that all auditors and all inspectors are nice.
Thanks for that, Karen. I'm just looking through the questions here. You know,
I've
there's
seen
a
one
question
come up twice actually in the chat and the Q&A that I think would be good for us to answer, and it's offering any advice on how to push auditors to give findings and things we know need improvement without risking majors. So what could be useful in this, as a tip for this, is actually to bring in a contractor, for example, to conduct an audit for you. And why I say that is, myself and Molly, as quality specialists within Qualio, this is a service we provide that we've seen customers get use from. So they might want us to conduct an internal audit of their whole QMS, but they know that they might have an area that they think would have findings or that they want to improve. So what they'd actually do is ask us to conduct a gap assessment of that particular area. So you have more flexibility to say, I know we need to work on this area. Can you please do an in-depth gap assessment or an in-depth audit, so that we're prepared for when an auditor comes, that we know we've addressed those areas. So I'm not sure if that's helpful, but it can be difficult to ask an auditor directly because they've come with an agenda, and what they're going to do is a snapshot in time. They only have, 2 or 3 days to do everything on their agenda, and they may not be able to focus on, well, you also may not tell them exactly to look at where the problem areas are. So that's why I'd recommend maybe someone external coming in. You get the benefits of it not being internal within the company. You've got someone on the outside looking at it, and then you can tell them to focus on a specific area.
Okay, thanks, Lola, for that. Let's see, there is a question here on the software itself. Is there an audit trail showing those documents going out of the system? In which file format are the documents being downloaded? So basically, if you smart link the document to the index document that you send to the auditor or provide to the auditor ahead of time with those documents tagged, there is no audit trail to show that they've opened it, right? But it's all contained within the system. Right, and then if you were to download it into a file format, it saves it as a PDF from Qualio. So that's just some basic functionality. And if you had any more questions about that, if you wanted a demo, we can organize that after. So let's see, are there any other questions that have come through here?
Do you want to answer the question about, so I don't know if Kieran or Lola, if you want to answer the question about software validation, file-based database servers or cloud, because I think that's an important one to understand about Qualio.
Yeah, certainly. So the software validation, when you decide to go with Qualio, you have two options. You can either take our executed validation package, or you can validate the system on your own. Qualio is multi-tenant, so it means that we all have our own instances of Qualio, but we are using the one platform. So that's why you can take our executed validation package. We are cloud-based. But validating our software isn't an issue. We've seen customers do it extremely quickly within a day if they take our package, and within a few hours if they decide to do it themselves.
Yeah, it's actually a really, really easy process. And I'm going to say one of the things which is also important is that, you know, there is support online. So when we're having inspections, you know, I did actually sort of like drop a note into support and said, you know, today we've actually got our BSI inspection. So, you know, can you let me know, are there any issues? Or if we have any issues, is there somebody, you know, available to help us? Not that we had any issues at all, but it was nice knowing that the support team was there to help out. And going back to the validation side, we validated the first part of our system. It took us about a day in total to actually do the validation, but that was because I was quite picky. So I used the package, but I also added some other things in that I wanted for ourselves. And we had to do, there was a change in one of the parts of the system. So we did a later validation, and that took us about half a day to do. And it's actually quite a painless system. And, you know, I've been using the system for 15 months now. And, you know, I as many documents as I can cram into Qualio, Qualio has crammed into it. We use it for as much, and we use it for business as well as quality, as well as auditing, as events, as SOPs. We use it for absolutely as much as we possibly can. And about the only thing we can't use it for, because it really isn't designed for it, is the trial master file.
Brilliant. See, there's another question here. Is there a trend ongoing where GMP auditors more value the OMCL guidelines, which are practically new, rather than ICH or FDA, et cetera, guidelines? You know, Karen or Lola, do you want to take a stab at that one?
Is it in the, sorry, I couldn't, whereabouts is the
sorry,
question? Is it in the
it's in the Q&A there, or in the Q&A section there.
Not being a GMP expert, I don't know, but if we could jot the question down, I'll talk to a GMP person and actually get back to whoever that person is. And I still can't see the question. Oh, there it is. Okay. Okay. So if we can take down the name of the person, we can actually provide an answer to that question for you.
Okay. Look at that.
I don't think any of us have got the right experience to actually answer that.
Okay.
That question. Okay. I'd like to pick up on something that Lola answered earlier, because I probably said something where I said that I make all of my documents available. So I make our policies and SOPs available because we're such a small company. We don't have hundreds of them. And so I know what's available and I know what the SOPs cover. And bearing in mind my last inspections were for notified body for ISO 13485 certification, it's actually quite simple because you have to have an SOP that covers each of the sections in ISO 13485. So basically, most of our SOPs cover that. We do have a few that are not ISO 13485 required, but they were so few. And when I spoke to the notified body assessors, we've had 3 different assessors, when I spoke to them, they just said, oh, well, if it doesn't apply to ISO 13485, we just ignore it. So because it wasn't burdensome on them, I didn't have to take them out. If we were to have an MHRA GCP inspection now for our pharma products, I probably would remove and I would out tag the SOPs and processes that support our device, because they really aren't all applicable to the pharma product. So that's probably can sort of answer that question a little bit as well. So, you know, I'm mindful of what I've given to the inspector, but I'm also quite an open auditor in what I will provide, because, you know, at the end of the day, I'm trying to show them that we're actually operating in line with the regulations.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that, Karen.
What are the risks to everything? That was it. Yeah.
I see we've had a few questions on how much does Qualio cost. So the best thing for that is we wouldn't know the cost of the packages, but if you are interested in learning more about Qualio, please reach out after the webinar and we'll connect you with the right people who'll be able to discuss that with you.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah. So I think we've answered most of the questions that were in the chat there. We're going to bring this to a close now. So I wanted to thank everyone for joining today. An email will be sent to anyone who's registered with a recording of the webinar, and this will provide you the opportunity to request a demo of the Qualio platform if you want. And if anyone has any questions that they want answered, they can also respond to that email that's sent to them as well. So again, thank you everyone for attending. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Lola. It's been a brilliant webinar, so thanks.
Thank you, Molly.